Hello everyone and welcome to Montuno y Tumbao. My name is Lucas Quintana and I'll be talking with you today about Latin music. Specifically, we're going to be going over piano lines and bass lines in various Latin styles, mostly Cuban styles. We'll be going over cha-cha-cha, merengue, cumbia, boleros, son, and salsa. So 6 different styles. But I'm actually going to group son and salsa together at the end, and you'll see why when we get there. So just a few things before we get into actually demonstrating on the piano here. I just want to explain why the class is called Montuno y Tumbao. So those are 2 terms that come from Cuba, and Montuno refers to what the piano does in these styles of music, and the Tumbao refers to what the bass does. Now, that is not strictly the only names that they use for this. The original name in Cuba was guajeo, for what the piano does, right? And that's spelled G-U-A-J-E-O. But the more common term for it is montuno, for what the piano does. But even if you get into more contemporary Cuba, like in timba music, they actually call the piano lines tumbao also, like what they call the bass lines. But for the most part, the most common ways to name what the piano does is montuno, and what the bass does is tumbao. Right? So that's why I called the class that, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the reason that I'm not a bass player, I'm a piano player, but the reason that I want to talk about bass also is because, for one, well, it's very important for a piano player to understand bass, because if you ever look on a stage, right, when a band's playing, the piano player is always standing right next to the bass player, or playing right next to the bass player. And that's because the bass player and the piano player always have to be really in line, right? They have to have a lot of chemistry and be listening to each other and following each other. So that's one reason that a piano player has to understand bass, and vice versa. A bass player has to understand piano really well. The other reason is because when you don't have a bass player, right, as a piano player, you have to be able to create bass lines. Everything below this middle C area this way is called bass clef for a reason, because these deep notes, they imitate the bass, right? And so a piano player really has to be able to create a bass line, a harmonic line, and a melodic line all at the same time, right? It's kind of like a one-man band instrument if you don't have a bass player or other instruments. So because of that, I want to talk about bass also, right? Because to be a well-rounded piano player, you really got to be able to play these bass lines really well. So that's what we're going to be talking about: montuno, piano, and tumbao, bass. Okay? Just a couple more things before we get into playing here. These are not strict rules. Well, how do I put it? So these bass lines and these piano lines, right? I'm going to show you like the roots of these genres with regards to these bass lines and these piano lines, right? So for sure, there's kind of like rules that I'm teaching you about this music, but it's not 100% strict in that there's also a lot of variations in the ways that you can play these things, right? And what I mean by that is, like, I'm going to be showing you a combination of what I've learned from studying this music formally and learning the roots of this music, but also I'll be showing you that with a touch of my own style, right? Which I've created from listening to other artists and imitating and kind of just creating my own style from that, right? So my point is simply that, right? That I don't want you guys to think this is the only way that you can do these things in these genres, because that's not the case, right? There's a lot of variations of these things. So what I'll be doing is I'll be playing bass lines, and for the bass lines, I'll be able to explain to you exactly what rhythms I'm playing, right? Meaning notation-wise. I'll tell you it's 2 dotted quarter notes and a quarter note, or whatever the rhythm is, right? For the piano line, it's a little harder to do that, right? Because there's a lot more variations with the piano lines, and there's a lot more improvisation that goes into it. It's kind of open, so I'm not really going to be able to break that specific rhythm down for you. You usually don't write that out in this music, but I'll try my best to break it down for you. Okay, so let's just dive right in here. So let's start with cha-cha-cha. So in cha-cha-cha, the commonly used bass line, rhythmically speaking, by the way, I'm going to be speaking rhythms here a lot, because when you get down to it, what really defines a genre more than anything is the rhythms that each instrument is taking on, right? So I'm going to explain to you the rhythms that are going on here with these instruments, because that's really what makes the genre more than anything, right? And so when we break down what's going on in the tumbao, or the bass line of cha-cha-cha, right? It's something like this. So rhythmically speaking, you'd write that out as a quarter note and 2/8 notes tied to a quarter note and 2/8 notes, right? And so it'd be bum, 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 bum. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So that's what the bass line's kind of doing when you get down to the roots of cha-cha-cha. And by the way, for these bass lines, it's going to be usually roots and fifths of chords that we're using, right? So like an F major chord is going to use an F as the root and a C as the fifth, right? F, C, 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 F, C, C. So for all these bass lines, it's mostly going to be roots and fifths. Okay, now what the piano does, what the Montuno does in these cha-cha-chas, there's different things you can do. Let's say that we have a bass player, so I don't need to be playing this because the bass player's got it covered. Well then, so you're going to be playing with both hands then as a piano player, and you can do something like this, right? For the rhythmically, it'd be something like this. So basically, what's going on there is ba-dum, boom, ba-dum, boom, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Right? That's if you want to play with harmonized chords. If you want to play with broken chords, you can do something like this. You could even do all 8th notes, right? Something like this. Now, if you don't have a bass player, you're going to have to be doing this bass line while doing that stuff, right? At the same time. So, if you're gonna do the harmonized chord, you wanna do all upbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? So when you put it together with the bass line, it's gonna sound like this. And the other one, are all 8th notes. Right? So now, to give you an example of an actual song, one of the most famous choruses in cha-cha-cha goes something like this, right? Los marcianos llegaron ya y llegaron bailando rica-cha, 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 rica-cha. Así llaman en Marte al cha-cha-cha. The other one, los marcianos llegaron ya y llegaron bailando rica-cha. Rica-cha, rica-cha, rica-cha. Así llaman en Marte al cha-cha-cha. Right, so that's cha-cha-cha, right? When you get down to what the rhythms are of the bass line and the piano. Okay, let's get into boleros, right? So for boleros, kind of the bass line rhythm is something like bum, ba, boom, boom, bum, right? Something like that. But instead of just using a root and fifth, I like to use a chromatic movement, right? You can just use the triad too, you can go. But I like to use a chromatic movement, right? Something like this. So I'm playing chromatically in F sharp before I get to G, right? So what that would be written as is a half note and 2 quarter notes, right? I'm sorry. It would be a dotted quarter note, an 8th note, and 2 quarter notes. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, right? So now, what I like to do in the piano part, it's kind of open because boleros are kind of like ballads, but if you want to explain something rhythmic to you that's a little easier to understand, I like to do something like this, right? Or right, something like that, right? So right now, if you take an actual song, now this song is actually bolero cha, right? So it's going to start off as bolero and then turn to cha-cha-cha, which we just talked about, right? And it goes something like this. It's called quizás, quizás. Siempre que te pregunto que cómo, cuándo y dónde, tú siempre me respondes quizás, quizás, quizás. Here comes cha-cha-cha. Estás perdiendo el tiempo pensando, pensando, por lo que más tú quieras. ¿Hasta cuándo? ¿Hasta cuándo? Right? So that's actually bolero cha. Right? Now, let's get into cumbia. Right? So for cumbia, there's a few different things you can do. Right? A bass line could be something like this, nice and simple. Or just the triad, like D minor would be D, F, A, D, F, A, D. Right? So what that's doing, I like to count that in 2-2 cut time. So it'd be a half note and 2 quarter notes. Bum, 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 bum. Right? 1, 2, and 1. But you can count it in different ways. I like to count it in 2-2. You can count it 4-4 if you want. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Now, that's one bass line. Another bass line could be something with a little more syncopation, a little closer to son, right? Something like this, right? Right? But let's start with the first bass line, right? And then explain the piano for that. Now, if you have a bass player and the bass player is playing this, right? Maybe with 2 chords, D minor and A major, right? Then you can do something like this, right? Really simple. So basically, pop, ba dum pop, ba dum pop, ba dum pop, right? If you're playing without a bass player and you got to play bass, then you want to just do upbeats, right? Right? So you're just doing 1 and 2 and 2 and 1 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 and 2 and, right? So that's a more traditional, simple way of playing it, right? A more like cumbia más cubaneado, more like Cuban style, will have a little more syncopation, like with that other bass line. That bass line is a 2 dotted quarter notes and a quarter note in 4/4 time. So bum bum boom bum bum boom, right? So 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3, right? So if that's what the bass player is doing, then you want to do something like what we talked about in cha-cha-cha, all 8th notes, something like this maybe. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? Or you can do a little bit more open and, right? So if you don't have a bass player, well then you're gonna want to do that bass line at the same time, something like this, right? I'm sorry, I just did a cha-cha-cha bass line. It'd be this, right? Right, something like that. Now, to give an example of an actual song, Canoa Rancha by Grupo Nietzsche goes something like this, right? We'll start off with like a traditional style, like the first one I showed you, and then get into the chorus where it becomes more like a little more energy with the other style I showed you. Right, so this song starts off something like this, right? En esta canoa rancha que tú me mandaste traer, ya viene rompiendo el agua solo por venirte a ver. Right? It'll start off with something like that, right? And then when it gets to the chorus, maybe you can do something like this, right? Like we just talked about, right? Adiós canoa, me voy pa' vete, rayando la aurora, me voy pa' vete, al son de la luna, me voy pa' vete, right? So then it gives it a little more energy once you get to the chorus and the vocal improvisation, right? Okay, merengue. Merengue uses that second bass line. I like to use that second bass line I just talked about in cumbia for merengue, right? The same thing, right? So the 2 dotted quarter notes and a quarter note. Right? Again, when you count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, right? Now, if you're playing with a bass player, well then you can do 2 things, right? You can do something a little more simple with harmonized chords, something like, meaning you're playing the notes all at the same time, block chords. So you can do something like this, right? Sorry, if you go a little faster like merengue usually is, something like this, right? Right? So, but in general, I like to do broken chords, where you play them more melodically and more like you arpeggiate them, right? So something like this, right? It's kind of a similar rhythm, but broken chords. And there's a little more energy, you know? So you can do those two different bass lines. And it's kind of mimicking the percussion. That's what, you know, in merengue, kind of like what the conga player is doing. This is kind of imitating it, which is very often what piano does. It kind of imitates what's going on there with the percussion in these styles. Now, if you have to play the bass line at the same time, right? You don't want to do that other one if you have to play the bass line. It doesn't work very well for piano to play at all. You'll probably want to do more this one, right? So it'll be something like this, right? Right? So if you put it with an actual song, to give you an example of an actual song, great merengue by Los Hermanos Rosario. It's called La Dueña del Swing, right? Goes something like this. A mí me gusta ver con la sabrosura con que esa morena mueve la cintura. A mí me gusta ver con la sabrosura con que esa morena mueve la cintura. Right? And then it gets into the chorus and it's really fun. It's, y tiene swing, y baila swing, y goza swing, con mucho swing. Right? So you can see there's a lot of energy in merengue. It's really upbeat, really fun to dance to. And really fun to play. So that's merengue. Now, let's get into these last two styles here, son and salsa. Okay. Before I talk about son and salsa, I want to give a little brief history and clear up a common misconception about it. And the reason this is important is because salsa is one of the most popular styles of Latin music that's ever existed, right? You ask people around the world, what's son, what's danzón, what's cha-cha-cha, what's rumba, all this stuff. They might not know what it is, right? But you ask people what salsa is, everyone knows what it is, right? And everyone's always going salsa dancing, right? And so it's important to really understand this style that is so popular, right? People deserve to know about the style that they love, right? And so, just a brief history really quick, and then I'll explain why son and salsa, I'm grouping them together. So son, S-O-N, son started in Cuba in the 1920s with people like Ignacio Piñero and Miguel Matamoros and some others. And it was one of the earlier forms of pop music in Cuba. And then you got into the 40s and 50s, and you had Cuban musicians leaving Cuba, like Mario Bauzá, Chano Pozo. They went to New York and they got together with jazz musicians like Dizzy Gillespie, for example, and they created Latin jazz. And Latin jazz used kind of the rhythmic patterns of son, but with more advanced harmonic movements, more improvisation and descargas, jam sessions and things like that. And then you get into the 60s and you get into like boogaloo. Now boogaloo was very simple. It was like a Latin blues. Basically what it is you take like a blues line, which is like a 1-4-5 chord progression with all dominant chords, right? Or sometimes it was just one dominant chord the whole time, like a Mixolydian modal thing. And then you add like a Latin bass line over it. So you'll have something, you know, like Watermelon Man, right? It sounds very bluesy, right? And then you add like a cha-cha-cha bass over it or something, right? See, that's kind of like what boogaloo was. It was just like a Latin blues thing. And it was really fun and easy to dance to and to jam to, right? But a lot of now getting into the salsa era in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, a lot of them didn't like the boogaloo, right? It's kind of like the same thing of what happened in the swing era. A lot of musicians in the late 30s of the swing era were getting tired of the same old thing, and they wanted to break away and do their own thing, so they created bebop jazz, you know. Kind of the same kind of thing here, right? Like there was a lot of musicians in New York that didn't like the boogaloo because it was so simple and and kind of boring for them to play. The people loved it because it was just like so groovy and fun to dance to, but the musicians didn't necessarily, they wanted a little more. They wanted a little more of a challenge, and they wanted more sophisticated music. Not all of them, I'm referring to some of them, right? Well, one of those was Johnny Pacheco, right? Now, Johnny Pacheco was one of the pioneers of salsa in the 70s. And so then what happened with salsa is people like Johnny Pacheco got together with Puerto Ricans, and they created Fania Records and the Fania All-Stars, you know, and this is when Celia Cruz started getting really huge a little after this. And, you know, you had groups like La Sonora Ponceña from Puerto Rico and El Gran Combo from Puerto Rico. And there was a really huge, mostly Puerto Rican movement towards this salsa, right? Now, the common misconception is that Puerto Ricans created salsa, right? That's only half true, right? So what happened was the Puerto Ricans, they basically took their own styles and kind of blended them a little bit with Cuban styles more than anything. And kind of like all those other styles I talked about, like they took things from Latin jazz and boogaloo and all these things, and they kind of, there's a reason why they call it salsa, like it was a blend of these things, right? But more than anything, what you see in salsa is this underlying rhythm that comes from son cubano, from the 20s that I talked about, right? From the 1920s, right? Which is basically a tumbao that goes something like this, right? And a montuno that goes something like this, right? Right? These and so when you put that together, it's got that like descarga salsa feel. But what's going on in that bass line and what's going on in that montuno is really son, right? Now there's a bunch of variations of these things. Again, it's not strictly what I just played. You can play in different ways. But what happened really was that even Johnny Pacheco went to Cuba to study before going back to New York and being a part of that salsa revolution, right? A lot of the musicians did that, went to Cuba to study. So what happened more than anything is that Cubans created son, and then mostly Puerto Ricans in the 70s took that son, along with some other things, but mostly son, and they popularized it. They commercialized it, made it huge, and they called it salsa. And another thing they did was they kind of adjusted the instrumentation a little bit, right? Now you had these huge bands with like 3 trombones and more piano, whereas in the song it was more like 5, 6, 7 guys playing 3 guitar and 1 trumpet maybe, right? So they kind of adjusted the instrumentation a little bit in salsa too. But those underlying rhythms that were there was son, right? So salsa is son, right? So that's the best way to put it. Not taking anything away from the Puerto Ricans and other Caribbean countries that helped in the creation of salsa. Not taking anything away from them at all. Salsa dura from the 70s is some of my favorite music. I love it, and I love Puerto Rican music. I love Puerto Rican folk music, and I studied in Puerto Rico, right? So nothing against that. All I'm saying is that there's this misconception that, oh, the Puerto Ricans created salsa and that's the end of it, and it's a lot more than that. It was a combined effort between a creation of the Cubans called son and Puerto Ricans taking that and making it huge, and famous, and just worldwide, right? And they did an amazing job of it. So now I'll show you an example of what I mean, right? I'm gonna play you a little bit of one of the most famous son songs of all time, and then a little bit of one of the most famous salsa songs of all time, so you can see that they're almost identical rhythmically speaking, right? So let's look at the son, Lágrimas Negras, okay? Let's look at what's going on in the bass line and the piano here. Aunque tú me has echado en el abandono, aunque ya mataste todas mis ilusiones, en vez de maldecirte con justo encono, en mi sueño te colmo, en mi sueño te colmo de bendiciones. Sorry, messed up a little bit there. Now, so you can hear what's going on in the bass line there and the piano, right? Now let's look at the other song, El Cantante, one of the most famous salsas of all time. I'm gonna play in the same key, right? Yo soy el cantante, y hoy han venido a escuchar lo mejor del repertorio. A ustedes voy a brindar, right? Same thing, same bass line and the same montuno going on, right? Right, so you can see the similarities already in what's going on between song and salsa. And then you look at the structure of song and salsa. It's always verse and then a little more energy in the second half with chorus of multiple singers with one singer improvising in between the choruses. It goes like that for song, it goes like that for salsa, right? And so for example, in Lágrimas Negras, back to the song, the chorus goes, tú me quieres dejar, yo no quiero sufrir, contigo me voy mi santa, aunque me cueste morir. Improvisation, que tú me quieres dejar, que yo no quiero sufrir más, contigo me voy mi santa, porque con ella yo quiero estar. Mamá, tú me quieres dejar, yo no quiero sufrir, contigo me voy mi santa, aunque me cueste morir. Right? So then you look at El Cantante, same thing, chorus and improvisation, right? The chorus goes, hoy te dedico mis mejores pregones, yo soy el cantante, vamos a celebrar, no quiero tristeza, lo mío es cantar, cantar, hoy te dedico mis mejores pregones. And it ends with what? Does that a few times, right? So you can see again, chorus, improv, chorus, improv. So you can see that the rhythms and the structure are almost identical, right? What really changed with the salsa revolution was the instrumentation, minor changes in the instrumentation, and slightly more advanced harmonies, I would say, that kind of were influenced by Latin jazz. So before I finish here, let me break down those rhythms that are happening. The bass line of son, what it did was it took kind of the same thing that we talked about in the cumbia and the merengue, which was that, two dotted quarter notes and a quarter note, boom, bum, boom. But now you have a tie to every measure. So instead of, now you hold, right? That's why you have this, right? So if you look at like the other one, and then song and salsa with the tie, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's the only difference. They took those two dotted quarter notes and a quarter note, and they put a tie to every measure, right? So you hold out a little longer. And then the piano, there's a lot of different ways that you can play song and salsa piano. You can do something like this, right? Like the original guajillos from Cuba, right? Something like this. But you still got that same bass line, boom, bum, boom, 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 bum, right? Or you can do that same thing with more of a modern style of playing it, right? Right? Or you can do even like more jazzy, right? But it just, there's a lot of variations of this, right? Well, I think that's it. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you enjoyed it. I just want to finish off by saying that the best advice I can give is to listen, right? And what I mean by that is find artists that you love, listen to what they play, how they play, imitate it exactly, transcribe it, play it yourself, and then break it down, see what they're doing, try to understand what they're doing and why they chose this chord and that chord and this rhythm and that rhythm. Start trying to apply it to your own music, right? You do that with enough artists, and you'll see that little by little you start creating your own style. And it's a style you love because it comes from all these different artists that you love, right? Some recommendations for artists that you should listen to: Bebo Valdez, Chucho Valdez, Papo Luca from the Sonora Ponceña, Rubén González, Peruchín, Noro Morales, and the list goes on. bands that you should listen to, El Gran Combo, like I said, Sonora Ponceña, Sonora Matancera, Septeto Nacional, there's a lot, Willie Chirino and Celia Cruz, obviously like the more modern artists, Gloria Estefan, people like that, Fania All-Stars, you know, the list goes on and on, right? You just find the artists that you love. Oh, Ernesto Lecuona. Ernesto Lecuona is one of the greats of classical Cuban music that kind of brought danza and more rhythmic classical music, syncopated classical music into Cuba. That was really cool. Actually, that happened a little before him with Ignacio Cervantes, but Lecuona was also a pioneer in that. Listen and imitate and create your own style that way by listening to all the artists you love. So again, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll show your support by checking out my new album and music video. You can find the album on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, a lot of different places. The album's called 500 Grados, 500 Grados, Grados, and it's the number 500, and then Grados, 500 Grados. And the music video you can find on YouTube or Vimeo. It's called Enciende el Horno. Again, it's Enciende el Horno. Feel free to check it out and share. Feel free to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. You know, my name on Facebook and Instagram are the same, Lucas Daniel Quintana. Subscribe to my YouTube page, same thing, Lucas Daniel Quintana. So any support is appreciated, and thanks again for listening, guys. Take care.